Okay. Okay, welcome to this session on the engagement model of problem solving. So what I want to do now is sort of reflect back on the first 3 weeks of the course that you've had and to tie it together in a singular model. And I want to explain a model that I've found useful for dealing with complex and difficult problems called the engagement model. And I want to break down the steps that are involved in dealing with that and show and lead you into the next phase of the course, which is all about dealing with the complex, more wicked problems, if you like. So the problem-solving method that you will have been introduced to now in Module 1 is a traditional type of problem-solving method, which is represented here as a cycle. So if we go out of the waterfall model for a moment and we step back and we start to think about the cycles of problem solving, what we want here is to consider more deeply the phases and how they relate to each other. This is what we call the waterfall model, the traditional model. But what I want to point towards here, to take your thinking a step further, is the idea that the frame or the window that you use to define the problem space, the problem frame, if you will, directly correlates or directly relates to the causes that you perceive the problem to have. So if you take these 5 steps, defining the problem, analyzing the cause, developing a plan, implementing and reviewing that plan, and then evaluating the plan, there are a couple of critical stages that are missing from the traditional model so far as awareness and genuine managerial leadership practice is concerned. And that is the practice of reflective thinking, which we talk about in Module 6. In this session, I want to go through then try and point you towards the idea that the way the problem is defined, the way that you think about it, the more that the tools, as we said in the creative problem solving seminar, the more you expand the definition of the problem, the easier it is to optimize for a cause. So in this thinking here, if we go back to the time in which it was made, it came out of the economics literature. Herbert Simon, and Alan Newell, and people like that, James March, came up with this framework for understanding a problem. And that was, once you have defined the problem, the other 4 steps are easy, which is a no-brainer, right? But if you can't define the problem, then you can't take the steps to plan and adequately solve that issue in a team environment. This is a real problem, so to speak, because if you don't have a good set of steps for thinking about ways to define problems and ways to shift the definitions around and look at it from different angles, the chances are you could be optimizing for the wrong solution. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's talk about that in a little bit more depth. In the real world, so to speak, we notice difference or gaps. So problems in a social sense or in a managerial setting genuinely relate to the idea that there is a gap in the way that you perceive the situation. So if we go back to Herbert Simon's model, Alan Newell and Herbert Simon's model, the key contribution they made was saying that a problem is the difference between what you experience and what is actually happening. Remember that from Module 1? Let's take that idea a step further. So if we think about that, that's the way that we're engaging with the world. That's our view of it or our perception of it. And there's a video, I think, in the previous session when we talked about perception is reality. So let's take that idea a step further. If you perceive the problem from one angle and someone else perceives the problem from another angle, which one of you is right? See? And when you're dealing with a complex issue, it could very well be that both of you are right, as in the Ambassador reading, which we've already talked about in this course. So what I want you to think about as you're going through this session and as you're doing the YAMA exercises that are associated with it, I want you to think about the expectations between what you want in your life and what you actually have. What are the differences there? If you perceive a problem, so let's just imagine for a moment that you're an MBA student or a master's student, and you're wanting to get into the executive level because you believe that that is the fulfillment of your career path. When you finally get there, you will experience a shift in your thinking. Now, what has changed? Well, yes, you have a higher paying job. Yes, you have more responsibility. Yes, you're living what you believe to be your purpose and setting goals for yourself and moving further up the corporate chain. But now you'll have a different set of expectations and mismatches between what you want and what you actually have. And that's what the engagement model is trying to get you to see, is to stop and reflect about the way that you're defining problems and think about them from different points of view. Now, why would we do that? Well, if you define a problem from your own point of view, you'll only ever get the answers that you expect. But if you bring other people into the equation and ask them to help you to define the problem as well, then you'll find more and more answers. And you'll be able to see the problem from a three-dimensional view rather than seeing the problem from a linear point of view. So think for a moment that if one person can define a problem from a linear point of view, from their own point of view, from their own experience, and you're bringing in someone else from someone else's experience and then someone else, you'll see different dimensions of that problem that you weren't aware of, and it will make solving it a lot easier. Why is that? Well, because like Simon Sinek says, leadership is basically listening and empathy. Whatever the issue is, it has to be perceived by different people from different angles. So when you look at a problem from all of those different dimensions, what happens is you begin to understand what the problem truly is and where it truly sits. So let's take a quick example and think about if your company was having a sales downturn. What's the actual problem there? Well, the actual problem clearly defined is a sales downturn. Now, I would want to get an accountant's point of view of that on actually where the sales are downturning. I would also want to get the marketing point of view on why are we not attracting new leads, new customers. I would also want to talk to the salespeople about what's your experience on the front line. And I would also want to talk to the people who run our strategy and our core goals to see, well, what are we missing something in the market segments? Are we missing something from the overall perspective of the customer experience? And of course, I'd want to get the customer's point of view. Why would I want to do that? Well, the problem doesn't just relate to sales, it relates to the operations of the business. And to carve it up amongst these different people, they'll all give me different answers, but it points to the same singular truth that I'm trying to find. And that is, what is a really good definition for this problem? The word definition means structure, shape. So if I'm trying to shape a problem or trying to structure the problem, I'm doing so that everyone else can understand with absolute clarity what the problem is. Now, once I have that structure, I can move towards agreement. And once I have agreement, I can move towards solution. Far too often in organizations, we don't listen. There's zero empathy. We don't pay any attention to the people around us. And we certainly don't pay attention to the value of collaboration in problem solving. So typical approaches will look at it from a managerialist point of view, like a group of people sitting together at the top of an organization, dispensing out the truth and telling everyone what to do. But a lot of research is starting to suggest, and a lot of popular leadership theory is starting to suggest that they might be better off just laying down a pathway to solving issues, allowing those issues to be solved through collaborative endeavors and multiple perspectives, and then moving forward to a solution framework from there. So in summary, what I want you to grab out of this slide is that everybody has a different perception on what a problem may be. To make matters even more complex, other people might also think, you know what, it's not a problem. It's actually a very good solution for me. It suits me. So if we have a supply-vendor problem, for example, maybe a change in price fluctuates the value of an organization, but makes the supplier's business better somehow. In the case of Toys R Us, they shut down, but most people don't think of the toy suppliers who are actually wholesalers. They don't think of that. They don't look at it from the wholesaler's point of view. They look at it from the retail point of view. They're not able to make sales and maintain a profit. But there could be a million reasons why Toys R Us failed. I'm not inside the organization, but I couldn't tell you. But if I was there, I'd be looking at the layers of interacting decisions and the linkages between the problems to try and trace down where the core pain is. Once I'd have that, I would define it. And once I'd defined it, I'd set up a pathway to solving it. And look at that. The magic of television, right there. Definition to collaboration. In other words, that should probably be a double-headed arrow. I should probably fix that. We want to define the problem from multiple perspectives. All right, so let's get to the bottom of what the engagement model is all about, why I created it with my collaborators, why we did it, what it's all about. What we're trying to get to here is that it's very simple but very hard to understand it from a first glance. So the tenets of the model are, we look at pathways, and the pathways to solving a problem are fraught with things like tension and conflict, difficulty in discussing things, and roadblocks and disagreement. We try to shift the engagement of people with the problem to help them understand and see a different perspective. So I've used this quite effectively in doing lots of different case studies. And one particular area I found useful for was helping people to define needs for clients. So one thing that a lot of business people and a lot of people don't really seem to understand about being client-centric or customer-centric, if you use that language, is that it's someone else's reality that you're trying to engage with when you're speaking to them. So the messages have to create a pathway into their brain so that they understand, yes, this person gets what I'm saying, or this product or service is a good opportunity for me at the stage of the journey I am in my life at this point in time. As we shift our engagement to match their engagement, we get this resonance, which is the frame for the problem. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. What that enables us to do is, if we just zip back for a second, it enables us to do the other 4 steps in this model. But if you have that definition wrong, and you're not appropriately defining the problem with other people in mind, what happens is you get the problem definition that you already thought when you started the process. And although that may be right, you probably got a 2 in 10 chance of being right. So let's investigate this a little bit more, but let's have a look at it. So here's the basic concept. It has 4 different ways of thinking. So this really isn't a process model or anything like that. These are just a series of interchangeable steps that you go through when you're solving a difficult problem. It's based loosely on some of the problem structuring methods that you'll come across in traditional operations research, things like the soft systems methodology and stuff like that. The concept, so let's go through the steps and then we'll go back and we'll have a look at how it fits in with what you're doing in this course. What you have is the core concept. So every situation in which there is pain, there is a core concept that underpins what the problem is. So there's something core to the problem, deep down within people, inside their mind, and perhaps inside their hearts, if you think of what that problem might be. And it is being expressed. So these 2 things are related. The smart problem solver goes around and collects the expressions, which are little micro-narratives or little stories that people tell themselves about the current situation they find themselves in. What stories are people telling? What are they saying? What pain are they expressing at the moment? So here's a really quick example of, like, you would have seen this, surely some of you would have seen this. The 5 whys technique is a way to capture a problem expression. So if someone says, we're having a sales downturn. Well, why are we having a sales downturn? Oh, we're not selling enough units. Okay, then why aren't we selling enough units? Well, there's a competitor that's opened up and they've got a market share and they're getting better sales at the moment. Well, why is that competitor getting better sales? Oh, they do marketing better than us. Why do they do marketing better than us? Oh, they have a deeper sense of who the customer is and they know how to speak their language better than we do. We have a messaging problem. So as we go through these phases and we're looking at the expressions, what we want to do is compare and contrast these expressions to get to the deeper level truth of what we're looking at. If we simply rely on a linear waterfall style approach in this case, what we'll get is exactly the definition that we got. And I can't express this clearly enough. The human mind doesn't clearly express its intent up front. So sometimes if you think about, well, the problem is sales, let's just increase the sales. That's not the problem. Or we've already discovered over here that it's a messaging problem. We're sending the wrong message to the market about who we are and who they are and the relationship we have with them. So as we go through this, we want to look at opposing views on purpose so that we can find a better concept than one that we currently use. And then we want to learn through cycles of applying new concepts to the problem to see if we can refine our definition of it until we can hit that part where it begins to solve itself through planning. So first of all, let's summarize what I've just said. The concept. What is the current concept that underpins the problem or the dominant point of view that exists at this point in time? How are people expressing this concept? And what are the alternative explanations to this concept at the moment? So if you're caught on at this point, you're taking one set of concepts and you're comparing them to another, and you're trying to find other concepts and to compare them to the core problem concept at this point. What you're trying to do by doing that is to invoke something called the dialectic. The dialectic is an old word which means argument. So you're taking one concept, you're pitting it against the other, and you're trying to compare them. Now, why are you doing that? You're not doing it so that you can have a better argument, but something magical happens to the human mind when you focus on two polar opposites and compare them. Your brain automatically starts to look for solutions or a better concept. So as we put these disagreements together and map them, what we're trying to understand at this point is, what is the core pain here? And is there a better way of expressing it than we currently do so we can get rid of this problem altogether? And then we learn through cycles by applying these different ideas over and over and over again until we get a clear answer. So some models, here's a model that I developed many years ago with the assistance of Paul Eddington and a person called Mike Metcalf, both of whom are now retired. And what we were looking at was, is there a way to shift the frame when people are talking? So we're not talking about brainwashing here. We're not talking about changing the concept to make it more palatable. What we're talking about is a process of learning. So let's go through it a third time. And this is called the enhanced engagement model. I don't know why it's called the enhanced engagement model. It's very much like the first one. So let's have a look at the frame. So the frame is the concept. I like to use the word frame because frame is more consistent within the research, but also a problem frame helps me to say, this is the current dominant way of thinking. Now, what that does is it interacts with and interrelates with different ways of expressing the problem. So as someone is expressing the problem to me and they're saying things like, well, I have a problem at my workplace and my boss is a jerk or whatever it might be. And if I go to talk to someone else and they say, no, I really like the boss is very dedicated but pushes people hard. Then I talk to a third person, the boss is a micromanager. What I'm looking for there are different ways that people express the problem and how does it relate to the current concept that exists. What I'm trying to do there as a facilitator or what I'm trying to do there as a manager is I'm trying to tease out the underlying reality. What is really going on here? What is really happening? Because I have this dominant concept over here that we're failing and I have all these people expressing different points of view. Then what I want to do is take those different points of view and the dominant frame and compare them and contrast them to get to the deeper concept. All the while, I guess what I'm missing from this diagram, although it is kind of there, you've got the interrelationships between the frame and the expressions of the problem. What I'm looking for is empathy here. That's the core thing that drives this whole model. I'm looking for empathy. Why? Because I'm trying to understand the other person's points of view, persons, plural. I'm trying to understand what they're going through. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What's processing in their mind? Why are they expressing this pain to me? So as I feel this pain, so to speak, and I'm seeing it, I'm trying to take that and turn it into a better concept for redefining and defining the problem so that I can plan my way out of it. Immediately, when I compare the frame with an expression of the problem, I'm going to get what they call a dialectic happening. So you will be confused at this point. You'll be thoroughly confused. And you'll think, well, why do people believe this, but people are saying this? But after a period of time, you're working with people, you'll get themes will emerge. So a different type of theme will emerge. You'll be like, oh, right, so I see that people aren't happy with this micromanager, but this micromanager seems to think they're doing a good job. If I take these concerns to the micromanager in a gentle way, in a developmental or transformative way, explain to them, look, if you changed your style, you would actually have the people on side. If you learned to use metrics differently, these people would work really hard for you because they love the company, they love what you're doing, but they don't like the way that you manage them. I can then shift the concept from being a micromanager problem, shift it to the manager's problem and say, look, this is what's happening. At the same time, I may not be able to do that. But that's the idea, is that you're trying to get to the point where you can take the tensions that exist or the conflict that exists in the problem and shift it sideways. Why do you want to do that? Well, you want new interpretations. Simple reason. This is the whole crux of it. If people are thinking about a problem a certain way and feeling a problem a certain way, and you don't understand their point of view, you will never solve the problem. Because in an organization, it consists of people, obviously working with machines, but it consists of people and collaborative endeavors around core things that they're doing, like management, marketing, sales, accounting. If you work in the government, it might be taxation. It doesn't matter what it is, but there's human activity going on. If we break that down a little bit and we say that everyone that experiences the world experiences it through their own mind, their own perceptions, their own emotions, their own feelings, if we can get access to that, we can begin to redefine the problem. We can broaden the definition of the problem, as in the previous module's reading on creativity, and we can have a much better concept of the problem. If by taking the tension that exists or the conflict that exists and finding a way to remove it, we can actually begin to define the problem more creatively. And what happens is the magic happens is in step 4, we have new interpretations. If everybody agrees and there isn't a problem, then you don't have a problem, you have agreement. So it's something to think about anyway. Moving on. So this comes from my PhD thesis, which is unpublished, but I've actually got a bunch of readings for you to go through online as well. So go through this a couple of times, but remember the key things. It's about empathy, connecting to the other group of people that you're working with. It's about multiple points of reference. It's about having a discussion or an argument or moving to a better problem definition. And it really comes down to understanding the underlying frame that is driving the problem. So just keep this in the front of your head. If you're struggling with this, think of it this way. Every problem that exists has to be perceived by a problem. Has to be perceived as a problem by someone. If that someone is you or the people that work around you, go past the perceptions and drill down to the expressions that are coming through. How are people expressing the pain? How are they expressing their difficulties? What are they saying? What are they thinking and feeling? Once you get past the mind and into the expressions, you'll see what the real concerns are. Then you can take those concerns, compare them, and build a better definition of the problem, and solutions will come out of that new definition. Because if we go back a few steps, that's the magic of what the Herbert Simon model does. Once you have a clear definition of the problem, the causes become evident, the plan becomes evident, implementation and evaluation become easy. But if you don't have a definition of the problem, then you're doing absolutely no good to yourself or anyone around you. Lastly, I want to just come back to this for a minute. When you're thinking about learning forward, if you know there's a better way to solve the problem, so let's imagine you're coaching someone or you're mentoring someone, you see them making the typical mistakes. Honestly, a mistake I've seen in a lot of managers that I've met is micromanagement. If you could help them to learn how to trust their employees, it's a win-win. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those situations, those moments where a unique type of collaboration can occur and both parties get what they're looking for. All right, so that's probably it for this session. If you have any questions, put them in Yammer. This one was a little bit long, but hopefully you'll get something out of it, and I hope you enjoyed this short presentation as well. Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.